Playhouse is at 11:30. British Armed Forces are due over the next decade to complete a final withdrawal from bases in Germany, but they'll leave behind a remarkable human legacy. Chris Bowlby goes in search of the British Germans.
Ja, ich wollte eigentlich eine Dose Gulwas-Tabak, ne? Aber ist keine, oder?
Herr Hogburn stocks up on some essentials in his local shop.
Und ich hätte auch gern dazu ein Paket Blättchen.
But there's something unusual about this enthusiastic German consumer, because Simon Hogburn is actually British too. He grew up near Leeds, came to Germany as a British Army tank driver, married a German, and now lives near the British Army base in Sennelager. And he's a man who spent a lot of time finding the best way to help the Brits get to know the Germans.
And if you look to the left here, where you see that Live Premier League sign, that sign Typico, well, that used to be my public house. Right? But it's changed hands about 3 or 4 times since we left it. And we've ceased running the public house in 1998.
But a pub was a good place then of bringing the two communities together.
Oh, yeah. And so many British soldiers have probably learnt their German language more in public houses than even doing German courses. And because, obviously, young ladies go out in pubs, etc. And there's a real interest to learn it when the young lady's involved, and that's how I learnt German.
Speaking of which, here we are at your flat, and we'll go and meet your wife.
Yes, very good.
As long as they saw that the English person was trying to, go with the flow or speak the language, they were quite happy with them. Otherwise, they just ignored him.
A German woman like Anna Hogburn might have ended up ignoring her future husband if he'd stuck to the stereotype of the Brit visiting Germany, wary of the Germans, keeping himself apart. After all, that's what he promised his mother when he first told her he'd been posted to Germany.
And my mother said to me, "Oh, Simon, you'll be coming back with a young Fraulein." I says, "Never in my life." And then, of course, when you're out drinking, you get to learn and meet young ladies. So there's 2 good places to learn German. One is in bed or 2 in the pub.
Do you agree with this romantic view?
Yes.
But
it's funny, but most of them do learn either in the pub or with a girlfriend.
It's got nothing to do with romantics. It's just pure fact.
And what about the German community and the attitudes? Did you grow up with certain attitudes towards these British troops based here, family attitudes?
The older ones, they were a bit... They lost the war, didn't they?
I can remember, actually, Anna's side of the family. Her grandfather, he used to be in the German army, and I remember him having one of these old, Prussian helmets with a big spike on top.
That was my great-granddad.
That was your great-granddad,
yeah.
Right, yeah, OK. Anyway, the first time we went to see him, I don't think he spoke a word to me because he knew I was a British soldier, so he was very closed because he thought, we've got this British soldier coming here. But once I think he'd observed me and realised that I could speak the German language, slowly but surely, he warmed to me.
So I stole what happiness my heart could find from a German girl there on the River Rhine.
There have, of course, been many in the British Armed Forces who've done their best to avoid entanglements with the local Fräuleins, who've been happy to live in a more or less British bubble, like the ones surrounding the huge base at Sennelager near Paderborn. There's precious little feeling of being in Germany around here. In fact, if it's groceries you're after, the place to go is called Little England.
My name's Paul Bennett. I'm the owner and the runner of the shop called Little England.
So what are your best sellers at the moment?
Our best sellers are your standard. Your crisps are very, very popular. Of course, HB brown sauce, our teas and biscuits, custard creams, they all sell very, very well.
Munching their crisps or brown sauce, watching British football on TV, returning to an army base where you don't hear a word of German. Many of the British stationed here have had little or no contact with Germany itself. And now it's been announced that the thousands of British troops still based in Germany after the Cold War will leave by 2020. You might assume they'll leave little trace behind. Far from it. There are many more like Simon Hogburn who arrived with the army but then merged into the local community, settled permanently in Germany, had children with German partners. They've created a fascinating and surprisingly large group we can call the British Germans. And the flourishing of this group's all the more remarkable when you think of the circumstances in which British forces originally marched or battled their way into Germany. In 1945, the country lay in ruins, and Germans were widely loathed, suspected of universal support for Nazi crimes. Here's a BBC documentary from the time.
There's a new catchword in the British zone. It's the German word Fragebogen, or questionnaire. Every German civilian has to fill in a questionnaire in which he or she tells an almost complete life history. Most people have filled in several of them because if you apply for a job or a permit or a ration card, you are given a questionnaire. And it's checked against the last one you filled in, and it's numbered and documented and filed. Every civilian in Germany is numbered, documented and filed. It's part of denazification.
And denazifying the Germans didn't exactly encourage close relations between British occupiers and local civilians. But there were some who, even in those earliest post-war years, defied the hostility, though they'd pay a heavy price in official disapproval.
This sword was presented to my uncle that you've just seen on the photograph from my grandfather, you see George V. And then it was handed to me in expectation that I would be wearing it as a British officer.
In his flat in a small German town near Bielefeld, former soldier Owen Smart showed me his memorabilia, opening a wardrobe to bring out his old British mess uniform.
Very tight trousers and boots with spurs.
Yes, trousers with a stripe down them, and yes,
two white stripes as we were then. Yeah, yes. That's changed.
But next to it's another more impressive uniform, that of officer in the local German militia, the Schützenverein. These militias are local defence and sporting organisations with traditions reaching back to medieval times, and membership conveys real social status in any German community.
So there can't be many people who have both those uniforms in a wardrobe.
I doubt it. Probably no. I'm almost sure.
Very strange must be for you to think that you gained a higher rank in the Schützenverein than you did in the British Army.
Yes, yeah.
Schützenverein officer Owen Smart has clearly become a pillar of his German community. Hardly what he could have imagined soon after arriving in Germany in 1945, when he was given the most horrible of assignments, clearing the site of the Belsen concentration camp.
The war had just finished, and we were told, because we had rather large vehicles, my section was told to go to this place, and we'd heard that it was a sort of a concentration camp. But our terrible duty was to get in and clear up the mess. And I mean the mess, it was a shocking business.
His words, not surprisingly, tail off. What must he have thought of the Germans at that appalling moment? But he had to move on swiftly and begin work in the city of Paderborn as part of the British military administration, following the official policy of strict non-fraternisation with the Germans, until he was sent a new secretary.
This very charming young lady came in, but I was very standoffish because I was still, shall I say, anti-German, of course. We did become close friends. We were engaged 23rd of November 1947.
But then you had to go and ask for permission to marry from the British Army.
Yes, I was told to report to the brigadier. Rather fatherly, he said, I understand you want to marry Smart. I said, yes. One of our charming girls, I said, no, I'm marrying my secretary. What? He said, Smart, look, you know you're getting commission, but an English officer with a German woman, it's impossible. Go away and think about it. Think again. Smart, think of your future. Please, please. In the meantime, my wife was told to report to the medical centre for tests against venereal disease.
How did she feel about that?
She was shocked. Her mother was saying, is this the British doing this? We were in love and we held together, and we won in the end. They made it very difficult for me. So they posted me and I lost all my seniority.
There was a kind of punishment for marrying a German woman.
They just didn't want it to happen.
Why do you think that was?
In their mind, it was just unbelievable. Something immediately after a terrible, terrible war.
And so began 60 years of happy marriage until his wife died recently. But marriage to a German meant the end of Owen Smart's British Army promotion prospects. He and his wife had to make the best of it, returning to live in Germany after a spell of civilian life in Britain. That, Anna Hogben told me, has been a fairly familiar pattern. British-German couples that have gone to Britain often come back. Life as a British Army wife has been far from easy for many young German women.
It's all very well saying I marry a soldier, but soldiers are away a lot. Now, when the girls go to England, they're homesick. Some of them don't speak the lingo properly. Then they have kids, they're stressed, and they have nothing to relate to.
But do you think that's why quite a lot of British soldiers end up living in Germany, because their wives say, look, we really want to be back living in Germany. We don't want to go with you to Britain?
Could be. It could be. Could be a factor to it.
But in our case, it was totally the opposite.
I wanted to go back to England.
My wife loves England, and I come from Yorkshire, and we've visited Yorkshire so many times over the years, and she loves the countryside, etc. in Yorkshire. And the people, the friendliness, etc. And it was me that was the driving force to stay in Germany through health reasons, hospitalisation, healthcare, and so on and so on. So, at the end of the day, I think we made a good decision between us.
So there were practical reasons why it's been good to stay, but you're a frustrated Yorkshire woman.
Yes, I am. I am. I like the Yorkshire Dales and my Yorkshire people. I love them. But I still love it up there. I still would go back any day. But you're too expensive now.
It may lack some of Yorkshire's charms, but for Simon and Anna, life in Germany has definite practical advantages, such as high-quality healthcare. There's also, among many of the British ex-soldiers living there, a sense that Germany's avoided problems they see in modern Britain. I met a varied group at the Royal British Legion Club in Sennelager.
John Wykes. I first came to Germany in 1976. When I left the army, I stayed here in 94 because at that time I was still married, now happily divorced. But I like the German way of life.
I'm Jim Griffiths. I come from Herefordshire in the first place, joined the army in 1956, national serviceman, and ended up back in Germany in 1959. And that is where I met my wife in 1959, mid-1959, and we got married in 1960.
My name's Robert Miller. I first joined the army in 76 and was posted to Germany. I left in 85 and I worked in the United Kingdom for 5 years, and then I re-enlisted. And I left in 2002, married a German girl, and I've been here ever since.
Do you look on Britain differently, having spent so much time here, when you go back there?
I do, yes. Apart from going home to see my mother and my daughter, in the UK holds nothing special for me. And when I look at the papers and I read the news, you know, the thought of actually going back there to live frightens me to death.
But the structure here in Germany, it feels more secure.
Yeah.
It's more stable. I mean, I would not want to go and live back in the UK because it just seems a chaotic, totally disorganised society at the moment.
And it's interesting, I suppose, being based in Germany with the army, you could kind of see the German recovery, 50s, 60s, 70s. You saw it at first hand, and it sounds to me from talking to you now that you're now quite enjoying the fact that you live amongst it.
Yeah. What is going on every day in Germany? They're building, everybody's building. You won't see that in England.
They have a different attitude to recession, though.
Yeah.
They build the way out of it.
Yeah.
Whereas in the UK, they close everything down. I mean, I saw it in the 70s and the 80s and then again in the 90s. Everybody loses their jobs in the UK. Here, they tend to say, well, OK, it's a recession, but it will only last for so long. Let's start building now to put things in place for when it picks up again.
Do you ever come across people from this kind of background who you feel they're more at home in German than in English. They've almost become more German than British. Do you ever come across that, or do you all stay?
I come across that once where an old boy, he couldn't speak English. And he's still here today. He can hardly speak any English.
I remember when I first started integrating into a German community and I became a member of Legion, and a lot of members like Jimmy who used to come out with the odd German word, for instance like mobile telephone, he calls it handy, and that used to wind me up, but I find I'm doing it myself now because you just can't think of the English word for it, can you? I've gone into a British pub and said I'll have a pint of bitter.
Yeah. It may be a bit of a cliche. Some people say sense of humour. The British are never going to understand the German sense of humour and vice versa. Any thoughts on that?
Correct, the Germans have got no sense of humour at all.
Disagree totally. My wife tells some cracking jokes, and she must have a sense of humour. She married me.
No agreement then on German humour. But for these men, a share in the local economic miracle, good education for their children, a more family-oriented, stable society, these seem to be the big attractions of German life. Outside the cities, meanwhile, other ex-soldiers live more remotely, drawn into the landscapes of the prosperous German countryside.
So we're just getting near where I live now, and these woods on the left is where I often go looking for mushrooms. And I live in this cottage, and it's the old coachman's gardener's cottage to a schloss or country house.
Former army officer Gavin Peebles lives in a cottage deep in the Westphalian countryside, surrounded by enchanting forests.
When I first moved in there about 15 years ago, I counted, and there are 75 horse chestnut trees in the avenue leading up to my cottage, and then from there up to the country house there are another 75 oak trees. So it's rather wonderful.
This place has become, for him, an attractive base after the earlier rootlessness of family and military life.
I was born in India. My father was killed in the war. My mother remarried a Royal Air Force officer. She moved around. We moved around. I went into boarding schools. I never lived anywhere in my life more than 3 years before I settled here.
And you're part of a British-German community here that's perhaps quite a bit larger than people might imagine.
I think that's true. There are thousands of ex-military people living in North Rhine-Westphalia.
And institutions, meeting places, social gatherings that bring them together with the Germans that are perhaps unique products of this British-German coexistence, if you like.
Yes, the Weservale Hunt, which is a bloodhound pack, which was started up by some officers in the Blues and Royals when they were back in UK and thinking about their coming posting to Germany and what would they do when they couldn't hunt foxes. And it was run by the Brits up to a certain stage when then the Household Cavalry did not send a regiment to Germany anymore, and the Germans took it over.
Howdy. Come on, howdy.
Gavin Peebles took me on to the charming old Westphalian farm where the bloodhounds of the Weservale Hunt are based. They follow human and horse scents across the local countryside. Busso Freiser, joint master and huntsman, was there with his wife, Angela.
I was one of the first followers, and my wife too, and we hunted twice a week. The whole hunt was a very good mean for Anglo-German relationships. They learned to know a lot of people in the countryside and created long-lasting friendships.
And in your case, a sort of family link to the British Army.
Yes, we lost our daughter to the English officer.
So your daughter married a British officer?
Yeah, he left us the polo pony here instead of my daughter.
And is this an example of something that will stay part of the local society now, regardless of whether British troops are stationed in Germany?
Yes, of course. We will continue with that.
There clearly is a big British-German community here. Do you come across that sometimes in daily life here?
I went into the town to buy some gravel for my yard, and on the digger in that firm there was sitting a man who had an English accent, and I asked him, "Where do you come from?" And he said, "I was serving in the regiment, the Blues and Royals here before." And then the next day somebody came with a lorry and brought the gravel, and he was a Blues and Royals too. So in our town in Detmold, there are still many people who had been in the army before and who live here now.
Whether it's gravel-selling ex-Blues and Royals or the hounds of the Weservale hunt, all kinds of legacies will outlast the presence of British armed forces on German soil. The most complete British Germans are perhaps the children of British-German relationships, and some of those children are becoming influential figures in today's German society. I've come here to Hanover to meet one of Germany's up-and-coming young political leaders who might just be a candidate for Chancellor in the future. His name? Well, it'd be a bit of a change from Helmut Kohl, Gerhard Schröder or Angela Merkel.
My name is David McAllister. I'm 40 years old and I am the Prime Minister of the Federal State of Lower Saxony. Our capital is Hanover.
He already has the top job in Lower Saxony, where his predecessors include the former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder and the current German President. But David McAllister told me that he'd spent his early years in 1970s West Berlin feeling more British than German.
We lived in the middle of West Berlin, in the middle of Germany, but still it was a very British upbringing. British school, British shops, British hospitals, British buses. And of course my father read the Telegraph and not any German newspaper.
So initially, did you think you were growing up as a young British boy, even if you were aware of being in a different country, a foreign country almost?
Oh yes, I would say so that even though I spoke German to my mother and I grew up in Berlin, I felt British. I remember what puzzled me most was, like all schoolboys, we read the Beano, but also Victor magazine. And in the Victor magazine, the Germans were always the evil and the enemies. And I remember when we played soldiers, Germans were always the bad guys. And I remember asking my mother, it was 4 or 5, why are the Germans always the bad guys? And then she told me about the Second World War, which I hadn't heard of beforehand.
And presumably then, as you grew up and became a young adult, you had to, as it were, work out your own identity at this and thought about things in a different way. How did that come about?
Well, my father got retired in 1982, and then we moved to a small town in North Germany. I think for me personally very important was the decision I made after school. Do I want to do my military service in the German army? A yes or no. Germany still had conscription at that time, but I didn't only do the 15 months I had to do, but I did 2 years. And if you swear to protect Germany, to protect our country, that was something very important for me.
But do Germans themselves say, well, hang on a minute, if you've got that Scottish name and so on, but you're a German politician, are you, as it were, a sort of fully German politician in the way they would like you to be, loyal to Germany? Does that ever come up?
Once in a while you have emails or letters, some even nasty letters, mainly from elderly men from the very far right. But Germany's society is changing. Germany is becoming more diverse. If you have a closer look at German politics, we now have Liberal chairman and vice-chancellor who is of Vietnamese origin, Philipp Rösler. The leader of the Green Party, Cem Özdemir, is of Turkish origin, and the Prime Minister of Lower Saxony had a Scottish father.
Dieses eine Land, wir lieben unser Vaterland, wir lieben unser Mutterland und das allerletzte, was wir jetzt in Deutschland gebrauchen können, in dieser verdammt schwierigen Zeit, ist eine Regierungsbeteiligung unmittelbar oder mittelbar von Kommunisten zusammen mit Sozialdemokraten und Grünen.
The electioneering politician who speaks passionately of Germany as fatherland and motherland will feel more keenly than most the practical consequences, not only the symbolism, of British military withdrawal from Germany. For towns with large garrisons nearby, some in his state of Lower Saxony, the economic cost will be high.
There's still hope that the British government might change their decision, but I don't think they will do so. The Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary have declared 2020 will be the last year, so we've now got 9 years' time to prepare. It's sad, but we knew one of these days the British presence in Germany would come to an end.
When we've wound up the watch on the Rhine, ran a popular British song played by the Lifeguards band. But when British forces finally leave Germany, their legacy will be much more than a fading echo. How would a German Chancellor called McAllister affect British views of Germany? Or consider another scenario. Football matches between England and Germany traditionally revive old stereotypes.
Again, Muller comes up and it's a goal for Germany, and as in Turin 6 years ago, the Germans held their nerve better and Germany are through to their 5th Euro.
But what if next time the Germans beat England on penalties, the winning goal scored by Germany's top young player?
I already decided I just wanted to play for Germany. I was growing up in Germany. They put me through, they made me under 21 captain, so I think my decision is made.
That's the voice of Lewis Holtby, current captain of the German under-21s and the son of an ex-RAF British father and a German mother. The British Germans, it seems, are everywhere. And when those still stationed in Germany face returning to Britain, many more may opt to leave the army and stay in Germany instead. Anna Hogburn hears what soldiers around Paderborn are saying. Without the bases and their surrounding British bubbles, the next generation of British Germans may need to merge more fully into German society. They'll be following the example of Owen Smart, the man we met earlier who married a German in the late 1940s when it was more or less verboten. He lost his chance of becoming a British officer, but is now a proud militia officer in his German hometown.
I consider myself as an Anglo-Saxon. I use both the Anglo and the Saxon. After the Norman conquest, the Saxons were supposed to disappear, but in some of our heads it's still there.
So, in these minds at least, the alienation between Angles and Saxons, British and Germans, victors and vanquished, has been superseded by an older idea of common identity. Soldiers may come and go, living in their military bubbles, but quietly, little noticed, thousands of members of the two societies have been merging alongside. And they may offer a better idea of the British-German future than the fighting memories of the 20th century past.
The British Germans was presented and produced by Chris Bowlby. The editor was Hugh Levinson.